Welcome back. Today we'll be reading Their Duty, made by you/teller of Tall Tales. Thanks for the writer's permission. The link for the story is in the description and I hope you'll enjoy. Let's begin. Detective Clevens looked over the scene in shock. At least a dozen dead, bodies broken and twisted. One, a gold one, even had the broken blade of a small knife sticking from their chest carapace. The car of the bullet train was splattered with technicolor blood, and Cleven's talon covers were beginning to soak it up. He glanced over at the victim, a small Moesian girl who was tearfully receiving a medical checkup in a Medicraft. Despite there being 4 witnesses to the event, the story hadn't changed. His sharp eyes slowly turned to the lone, dark-skinned human in dirty, ragged clothing. An emergency medical technician was squeamishly watching as the man calmly stitched a long gash on his arm, closing it with a monofilament suture. He sighed and glanced at his partner. "Run me through it one more time." Officer Kalt sighed deeply as well, making a stressed gurgling sound as he looked through his report, gesturing at an adolescent Rallit with their throats slit open. "Witnesses report that these 14 individuals boarded the train being loud and boisterous. Our friend outside had been sitting alone in the back of the train car there." He used a tentacle to point out a seat where a leather bag still sat, right next to the door that led into the next car. "Well, after about 2 steps, this one decided to try and assault our victim, the Moesian. Witnesses report that the victim had repeatedly denied the perpetrator's advances when the perp decided to get physical. Miss Laive stated that he had grabbed her by the collar. Our unknown..." He pointed to the man outside who was now splinting his own broken fingers. "Reportedly stood up then and shouted, and I quote here, 'Get your grubby paws off her.' She said no, before pulling out a small folding pocket knife and pointing it at the group. It was then that our perpetrator decided to ignore our wild card and try to assault Miss Laive. Reports conflict slightly on what exactly happened next, but the most cohesive report from Miss Laive herself states that our wildcard proceeded to rush the perpetrator. There was a struggle and WC tore his throat open with a knife. The other perps then ganged up on our WC in an attempt to either subdue or kill him. That part is still unclear. Security footage only caught from this one." He gestures at a Zalexian with blunt force trauma wounds and a missing head. "WC had mopped up the Rallit, 2 Gorwon and a Gagnosian before the camera could start recording." Kalt pointed to where a handrail had been snapped off. "The Zalexian had ripped off a handrail to defend themselves, but our wildcard managed to disarm them and used the handrail to brutal effect, before holding the Zalexian's head out the window while the train was moving. We found it roughly a mile back along the tracks where it had gotten embedded in a tree growing near the tracks. After that, Wildcard proceeded to beat the remaining perpetrators to death with the handrail after giving them a chance to surrender. Naturally, they continued to try and fight their way out of the situation." Kalt finished the report with a deep, moist breath of disbelief. He waved a tentacle around in amazement before his 12 eyes focused on Detective Clevens. "He still hasn't said anything to me or the guys from the precinct, but we checked his ID. He was part of the 1st Terran Marines during the siege of Granator 6. Heard you also fought in that conflict. So we thought you might be able to get something out of him." Clevens nodded softly, clicking his talons together as he turned on his heel toe. "I'll try. Terran Marines can be a tight-lipped bunch, but I know how to talk to them." Stepping out of the train car, Detective Clevens yanked off his body camera and audio recorder in full view of the man before calmly sitting across from him and pulling out of a pack of cigarettes and a flask of whiskey. Taking a pull from the flask and lighting the cigarette, he offered the human a smoke and a drink. The Marine smiled softly and took a cigarette and the flask, taking a long pull from it before grinning softly. "Granatar corn whiskey. Some call it the worst in the galaxy. But in the trenches, it was like the gods' ambrosia." Clevens finished the old saying with a soft ruffling of his neck feathers, the closest he could come to approximating a returned smile. The human looked back at the train car and asked, "Is she okay?" "Shaken up, but otherwise unharmed. Probably going to need therapy." The man sighed softly. "Guess I overdid it." Clevens shrugged softly. "Maybe. I'm more concerned about why you did it. You could have gotten yourself killed." The Marine looked up into Clevens' eyes, smile fading softly as he smoked the cigarette pensively. "As a Marine, my duty was to kill the enemy and protect my battle brothers." Clevens nodded, letting the man collect his thoughts, the Marine's eyes watching the small Mauysian as he received some sedatives to counteract the panic from the stressful situation. "You were there on Granatar. I can see it in your eyes. Do you remember what it was like when we entered the city?" Clevens paused for a long moment, accepting his flask back and taking a large pull. "I do. Still have nightmares about sifting through the burn pits, finding those bones too small to be an adult. I also remember finding the nobles holed up in their bunkers, fat as ticks. I remember not seeing what happened to them." The Marine nodded slightly and took a drag of their cigarette, 1,000-yard stare fixed on some point off in the distance. "I did my duty as a soldier well that day, but I also did my duty as a human being just as well, if not better." His eyes grew a little misty as he looked back at the train car. "Just like back then, I did my duty as a human today." He looked Clevens in the eyes before continuing, wiping tears away with his untorn sleeve. "I couldn't protect them then, but I can, and did, protect her today. Whatever comes next doesn't matter. I did my duty. That is what matters." Detective Clevens nodded softly before rising to his talons and patting the Marine on the shoulder, snapping a Terran salute. "I'll put it in my report, but you should still expect a court summons in the coming weeks. The Metropolis is probably going to try and label you a vigilante still. Semper Fi, Marine." The Marine smiled softly and finished the cigarette, returning the salute before replying, "Do or die." Detective Clevens picked up his body cam and audio recorder, leaving the Marine his flask as he headed for his vehicle. He hated paperwork, and there was going to be a lot of it to do when he got back to the office. Thank you for listening. I'm glad to still have you here. I hope the differences in voices were noticeable, and not in a bad way. I tried some new things. Do let me know. If you have stuck around, go and show your appreciation to the writer on HFY. I hope you're having a good day, and I'll see you in the next one.